Welcome to another episode of Commissioner's Corner. I'm Josh Brown, Kitsap County Commissioner representing Central Kitsap on our Board of County Commissioners. And as usual, here I am on BCAT with Shar Burnett. Shar, nice to see you again.
Welcome, and I've got lots of questions for you.
You always do.
Just recently, what I've been paying attention to. So, Josh, the county is going to hire a new county administrator, but with a whole new title. So, what's up with that? Why the new title, and what's the process for that hire?
Well, good question. So, for about 10 years, the county had a county administrator. Every jurisdiction does things a little differently, but if you looked at the organizational chart for Kitsap County, the citizens would be at the top. You would have the 3 county commissioners, and then below the 3 county commissioners, we had 1 county administrator. And then reporting to that 1 county administrator were 6 departments. So we have 6 directors and 6 departments at the county. We have a director of public works, by far our largest department.
Right.
We have a director of community development, that's our planning department, a director of parks and recreation. And we also had a director of personnel and human services. That was a bit of an unusual department. We pass through annually about $60 million of human service grant dollars from the federal and state level. That position and those responsibilities were also merged with personnel and human resource type issues. So dealing with our employee health care plans, negotiating labor contracts. And then our other 2 directors were the Director of Administrative Services, which kind of has some general functions, but also is charged with putting together the county's annual budget together, as well as our Director of Information Services, our IT director. So in the past, those 6 directors were reporting directly to the county administrator, and then the county administrator reported directly to the board. We've had a vacancy in our county administrator position for a couple of years now, and really that started in large part after our previous director, after our previous county administrator, Nancy Bonanno-Grennan left. Nancy was an excellent county administrator. We miss her every day. But as she moved on to another opportunity in King County, we did not fill that position in large measure due to the budget situation the county was in. The commissioners were really trying to focus on how do we control the budget, and we just decided to keep that position vacant for a while. This past year, the county commissioners had a retreat, and we had a lot of good dialogue about what are some of the major challenges facing our organization. And honestly, I tell people this throughout the county. If I go speaking at various rotaries or chamber events, we have enormous turnover at our elected official level here in our county. And that's really common throughout the state. The days of having somebody serve as a county commissioner for 12, 16, 20 years, folks serving for mayor or on city councils for a long period of time, those days are over. In 7 years, I've worked with 5 different county commissioners on a 3-member board. I've lost track.
In 7 years.
In 7 years. I've lost track for our 4 cities how many mayors I've had to work with. I think I've worked with 12 or 13 mayors.
Right.
Every city's had at least 2. The city of Bainbridge Island decided to change their government structure. Now they don't even have a full-time mayor. So when you have that type of turnover at the elected official level, if you're going to have an effective organization, you really need to have the right people that are leading these key departments. So last year, the commissioners, we identified a significant challenge for our organization in the immediate future, but also in the long run, is the fact that we needed to do a much better job of leadership continuity planning. What that means is, and there are the same challenges that you see at the shipyard, that you see at Harrison Medical Center, that you see in our school districts. The baby boomer generation is retiring. We have a lot of folks that have been in positions for a very long time, and they've excelled, and they bring a wealth of experience and expertise. But when they retire, who's going to fill their ranks?
Right.
So the commissioners, we looked at our 6 directors, and we began to have dialogue with them about when folks may retire, what their personal plans were. And as retirements were coming up, the commissioners began to work very collaboratively with our 6 directors to come up with a plan of how should the county restructure, reorganize, to not only fill those key positions for folks that are going to be retiring and fill the voids that they leave in our organization, but also look at, as we're filling those positions, how can we do business differently moving forward to break silos, make our organization more efficient and effective.
Very smart.
So what we decided through this process, and starting in the fall, we brought on a consultant who helped advise our board and our directors on providing an outsider's glimpse into what's going on in our organization. We decided that having a structure of one county administrator and 6 directors didn't make sense moving forward. Part of that was, having worked with 2 county administrators, 2 of the 3 that have worked for Kitsap County, I think having 6 directors report to that one person puts too much of a burden on the county administrator. You're asking somebody to be an expert on budget issues, you're asking somebody to be an expert on labor relations, you're asking somebody to be an expert on land use and roads and sewers and parks.
And
it's
IT,
too much.
yeah,
IT,
right.
it's too much.
That's a lot.
So what the board began to look at in terms of a model was, does it make sense, instead of having a county administrator, to have a chief administrative officer focus on all the critical internal operations issues that the public doesn't see directly, but are essential for the county to function as an organization. So what are we talking about? We're talking about IT, we're talking about facilities, we're talking about our human resources division, managing our labor contracts, healthcare plans, all of our relations with our employees. We're talking about managing the county budget, and having one person that can oversee all those issues and have an internal operations team where folks are breaking down barriers so that when we're making decisions on our labor contracts, the folks in the budget office know what the impacts are. When we're making key investment in facilities or IT infrastructure, we're seeing on how all those items are connected. This chief administrative officer will oversee those functions. And then what the board decided to do was, and I should say, the 2 positions that we identified of our directors that would be retiring this year are, first, our longtime Director of Personnel and Human Services, Bert Ferruda. Now, Bert, on top of being the county's point person on labor relations issues and very complicated matters that we deal with, Bert helped create many of our human service programs in this county. When you look at Kitsap Mental Health, when you look at our chemical dependency programs, when you look at the Worksource Center in East Bremerton, so many of these programs, Bert either helped to start or created the partnerships necessary for them to start, or helped them expand and grow over time to greatly benefit our community. So he's leaving a big void, and when we looked at his position, the board decided that it made absolutely no sense to try to find somebody that could replace Bert, because nobody could have that experience on human services and then also have an expertise in personnel. So we split those responsibilities. And the county is pleased to announce that a few days ago, we publicly announced the hiring of Doug Washburn as our next Director of Human Services. Doug comes to us from King County. He actually had worked in Kitsap County some time ago. I think he was with us about 8 years ago. And Doug is a resident of Paulsboro, and I think the thing that really impressed me was Doug shared with our board that when he had worked in Kitsap County, his dream job was eventually becoming the Director of Human Services. That's what he always wanted to do. And he knew that in his position when he was with Kitsap County, he needed more experience. So he had worked in a couple positions for the state in the Department of Health and Human Services. And after working with the state, he has had a position managing the area aging group over in King County, a very large division of King County's Human Services. So we're bringing Doug back, and he's going to be now the director, but the board split those responsibilities, and personnel now will become a program manager position under the chief administrative officer. And later in the year, as we're filling this chief administrative officer position, the commissioners are going to look at public works, parks, as well as our Department of Community Development, our planning department. We're going to look at what makes sense for those functions moving forward. We've shared publicly that our longtime Director of Public Works, Randy Castile, is going to retire at the end of the year. And I think the board, working with our Chief Administrative Officer, we need to determine, does it make sense to keep those departments as 3 separate departments? Are there some opportunities to break silos, similar to what we're doing with the internal operations? The public touches those departments directly.
Exactly.
They touch public works, they touch planning, they touch parks. The public doesn't care about IS or facilities or who's putting the budget together. They want the results. They want the services at the end of the day. So having that internal operations team, I think, is going to really focus us. I think it's absolutely going to make us more efficient moving forward, but furthermore, I think it's going to help the board be much more deliberative and focus on our decision making. And again, the goal here is to reshape our organization to be more efficient, but also to be able to recruit the right people to come in and fill the significant voids being left by these retirements, so that we have the stability with the senior leadership at the county, so that whoever the county commissioners are, I mean, I like to tell folks, if you're a county commissioner, you ask good questions, you're a good listener, you rely on your staff and you give them the resources and the support they need to do their jobs, you can be a good county commissioner. Now, not everybody follows that recipe, but if you're that type of person, where you're asking those good questions and you don't micromanage staff, and and you're collaborative, then if we have the right people supporting that board and whomever is on the board of commissioners at that time, I think we'll have made a real difference in terms of allowing our organization to be more sustainable moving forward to deliver services to the public.
Excellent.
So
So what's the timeline look like to bring on this, what's the new title?
Chief Administrative Officer.
Chief Administrator. What's the
Yeah.
timeline look like? You
Well,
think?
we're reviewing applications as we speak,
Good.
and we don't have a firm deadline in terms of when the board's going to make a decision. Obviously,
few months or
recruiting
so.
Doug Washburn and bringing him on board, that was our first big vacancy that we needed to fill immediately, and we've done that. Doug, I think his first day is the 1st of June, I believe, is what we've worked out with him. With the Chief Administrative Officer, we're recruiting the position as we speak, and I hope we'll be able to bring somebody on board in the next few months. And then later in the year, we'll be addressing the issue with Randy's retirement in Public Works.
Huge.
Yeah, absolutely. In our Public Works Department, you will be hard pressed to find a more professional, outstanding group of individuals. And Randy does an incredible job managing his department and supporting his team and making sure they have the resources and the leadership they need to to be what they are, which is, I think, one of the best public works
Top
departments you
notch.
can find anywhere.
Yeah, top notch.
So we're being very methodical, Shar, and I think the public should know that with the work that we're doing on this leadership continuity plan, as the commissioners are calling it, I don't see any other local government entity in our county doing this. I don't see this happening at the school districts or the fire districts. Maybe it is, and I'm not knowledgeable about it, but we're really, I think, leading the charge on how do you manage an organization through change. And I think whether you're private sector business, whether you're nonprofit, whether you're a government agency, these are the things you have to get right, and we're doing that at Kitsap County.
Awesome.
And we're doing it as a team. The board is working collaboratively
That's
together
great.
and working collaboratively with our directors.
Very, very good. So the next topic is near and dear to everybody's heart in this county that takes the ferry, and the topic is passenger-only ferries. So where are we at in regards to that statewide, and also in regard to Kitsap Transit?
Well, if we're ever going to have additional ferry support in Kitsap County, it's going to be locally driven. The state of Washington
State
is not
doesn't
going to
want
come
a
bail
part.
us out. And I think the public and I think the residents of Kitsap County need to know that up front. Every year, our Board of Commissioners, the mayors, working to support our legislative delegation, we constantly are fighting the state to keep the ferry runs we have and to keep the frequency of service. The state of Washington, out of the goodness of its heart, is not going to come and add additional runs. They're definitely not going to bring us passenger-only ferry service to our community. So it's on us, and it always has been. I think when we look at passenger-only ferry service, if you looked at the plan that was put in place and voted on and failed in 2007, obviously times were very different. We were at the height of the economy. Folks were looking to the future, but it was also an expensive plan. It was 0.3% sales tax increase, which is a pretty significant sales tax increase. Our entire Kitsap Transit budget, we collect 0.08 sales tax. So this would have been 0.03 sales tax just for passenger-only ferry. And I've called it a Cadillac plan because I think that's what it was. When you're talking about raising $10 million of revenue on the low end, that's a Cadillac plan to me. I think we need a Chevy here. I think we need to look at how do we put sustainable ferry service in place in Kitsap County that makes sense for our community. And there are some folks who say we shouldn't be doing this at all. I think folks said think we shouldn't be looking at how we make ourselves and make our community more connected to the center of the economy in the entire Northwest are being very short-sighted. And here's the facts that I would put on the table. If you look at Kitsap County, from Hansville down to Olalla, there is a direct connection between your ability to get to Seattle and have accessibility to jobs in Seattle and the price of your home, the ability for a business to be successful, as well as family income. That's undeniable. Bremerton is the poorest city in our state for a lot of reasons. One of the big reasons why it's the poorest, when you compare Bremerton to the rest of Kitsap County, is the fact that it has the worst ferry runs to Seattle. If you look at South Kitsap, if you look at Manchester and Olalla and Southworth, you have beautiful shorelines that are every much as pristine as any beaches on Bainbridge Island. Why are houses on Bainbridge Island so much more? Why are family incomes so much greater on Bainbridge Island than in Manchester and Southworth? They're the same distance to Seattle. They're looking at the same body of water, and I'd argue, more beautiful. It's accessibility to Seattle and having that ferry service. So I'm looking at this from an economic standpoint. If you're in a situation where you don't have connectivity to jobs, and we're working very deliberatively locally to figure out how do we have private sector job growth. But we're also dealing with the fact that most of the job growth is coming out of Seattle, it's coming out of King County, it's coming out of the places where you have robust growth. We are still today a Navy town, and we're working very hard to diversify, but it's not going to happen overnight.
And how do we get that trickle down from King County? How do we get some of the spillover, especially in aerospace?
Yeah, I think we have to have that connectivity. And one of the things our community dealt with for a long time was companies didn't want to relocate to Kitsap County because they viewed us as isolated. When we got the second Tacoma Narrows Bridge, I think that's helped us quite a bit to be able to make the argument that we have the connectivity to the I-5 corridor, but we still deal with that challenge. People look at us and say, why would I move my company here when I could move to Frederickson in South Pierce County, where the land's just as cheap and you have much better access to I-5 and to the general market. So I'm a believer that if we're serious about quality of life in our community, if we're serious about how do we provide accessibility to jobs for our Kitsap County residents, we need to look at passenger-only ferry service. What I'm not in favor of is that Cadillac plan that I think we had put together, that previous boards had put together that was voted on in 2007. So we have to start small, and we have to start incrementally, and I think we have to focus on how do we make this the most sustainable ferry service possible. So the board of Kitsap Transit voted 5-2 to move forward with a planning effort. We have a state-of-the-art boat that's built, that's right now sitting in dry dock. And I think if we put our heads together, we can come up with a plan of how that ferry can eventually serve Bremerton and Port Orchard. I also think one of the areas where we haven't spent as much time, and I think we should, is looking at how do we connect Southworth to downtown Seattle. When you look at all of South Kitsap, the residents of South Kitsap really are isolated. You have the hour-long Bremerton ferry run, but if you live in Port Orchard, you got to first get to Bremerton before you can get on that hour-long ferry.
Right.
Or you can take the Southworth route, which is very challenging in itself, and you have to, if you want to arrive in downtown Seattle, rely on King County. I think we have real potential in Southworth to have a ferry service that runs to downtown Seattle that can be, out of our three connections, probably the most cost-effective ferry service. The advantages of Southworth over Bremerton is the fact that it's half the distance as the crow flies, but unlike the Bremerton boat where you have to run a high-speed vessel to deal with the wake issues, you can basically have a barge and just put people to downtown Seattle. So the fuel costs, both in terms of the length of the run as well as not having to run at a high speed, I think will make that a very cost-effective route. And we can't forget about Kingston. So, I'm supportive of looking at this. I think we got to be very creative. I don't think, the voters of our county are going to be supportive of a large tax increase to be able to support passenger-only ferry service. But I do think if we can demonstrate that this service is sustainable, demonstrate that we can do this right, I think we can get support for a reasonable approach, and we have to develop a business plan to do that. And I saw a lot of folks I rode the Bremerton passenger-only ferry probably about a half a dozen times when we were doing the testing. Were you ever able to ride it?
No, I never was.
It was a great experience, and I give a lot of credit to John Clausen and his folks, because you wouldn't have known that we had just been running that service for a few weeks if you were on that boat. You would have thought that this service had been serving Bremerton for 10 years.
Nice.
John and his team at Kitsap Transit did an outstanding job. And, I think if we can show folks that incremental approach, it will work. And, I think a good model for how you do things incrementally to build that community support is Kitsap Transit itself. Kitsap Transit started off as a small transit district just serving the city of Bremerton. And it's grown and it's expanded over time by proving to the residents of our county that they can get the job done.
That's right.
And that's meant going to the voters multiple times to expand the district via a vote of the people, as well as asking the voters for revenue to support that growth.
And should they now evolve into multimodal transportation?
Yeah.
Transit.
Yeah.
Buses, ferries.
I think we need to look at everything. I mean, I think our focus of Kitsap Transit, and as I've been a board member of Transit, I've been focused on two large groups to serve. Number one, commuters. We have a lot of folks that need to get to jobs, whether you're on a worker driver bus getting to the shipyard, or you're on one of our routed buses, or in a van pool, trying to get to jobs. Those are critical services that we can provide. And for commuters, if we're able to get more folks to take transit that are commuting to work, what it means is for the rest of us who can't take mass transit, frees up, reduces congestion, it's better for the environment. For those commuters, there can be a real value-added savings of folks not having to spend as much to commute, and that means more money in our local economy instead of being spent on transportation. So it's a win-win. The second group that we have to really protect are our seniors and vulnerable populations. And our Access bus service does an outstanding job of moving seniors, moving the disabled. So when I think of Kitsap Transit, and for the years that I've been a Kitsap Transit board member, I think about how do we serve those two groups of individuals? How do we provide service that makes sense? And right now, I think it's easy for folks who aren't ferry commuters on the Bremerton Run or on the Southworth Run to say, oh, well, that's not needed. If you're on the Bremerton Run and it takes you 15, 20, 25 minutes to drive to the ferry every morning, you're waiting to get on, you're on the ferry for an hour, and then when you get off the ferry, you got to walk to work, or you got to take another bus to get to where you're going. When you have folks that, and this is, I think, being pretty generous, when you have folks that are having commutes, but on the low end of 2.5 hours, and on the high end, potentially 4 hours every day, taken out of their lives. When you go on that Bremerton ferry and you see folks coming home from work, you see how exhausted people are.
Yep.
They're exhausted going to work every day and coming home, and they're not able to have the quality of life with their families and their friends because they're just beat up working Monday through Friday.
Right. Come home and go
And
to
if we
sleep.
can do anything to provide more opportunity for folks to be able to have quality of life, to have that accessibility to good jobs, and at the same time have a higher quality of life, why wouldn't we do it? So
Do your diligence. So that's what
Yeah.
the board decided to do.
Yeah.
Do the diligence, look at the business plan, just work it through a little more to see if this is what Kitsap Transit should do.
That's right. And where does it make sense to start, and how do we start incrementally? And again, I think if we all focus on how do we put together a sustainable plan, that put together a Chevy plan, not a Cadillac, I think we can make this happen. But we have to start small, and we have to build the confidence of the public, and I think we can do that.
Good, good. Josh, we have just a couple minutes left, and I wanted to ask you about the end of your tenure as chair of Puget Sound Regional Council.
Right.
And how does that change for you, and does it free up a little bit of your time?
Well, I get
And
to
then
go.
who became the chair?
Sure. Well, I get to go to all the same meetings I've always gone to. I'm just not president of the Puget Sound Regional Council any longer. But I've served for 2 years. Pat McCarthy, the Pierce County executive, is our new president of the Regional Council. I've
Wow.
worked closely with Pat over the last 2 years. She was my vice president. And our new vice president is John Marchione, the mayor of Redmond, who's a terrific fella. And really just just a great public servant. I have to say, serving at the Puget Sound Regional Council, it's been the best experience of my life as a county commissioner.
Nice.
We have the leaders of the region, mayors, county executives, county commissioners, county council members, port commissioners, city council members, in a room together working on how do we work collaboratively, how do we solve problems as a region, and how do we get things done together. Where else in government can you say that that's happening? It's definitely not happening in Washington, D.C. And I can say, at least this week, it's not happening very well down in Olympia. It's working. It's happening at the local level. It's happening at the regional level.
That's great. That's refreshing.
And we have a very diverse group of folks that are involved with the regional council. You can have the mayor and the city council members of Seattle. You can have folks from Arlington or Everett up in Snohomish County. You can have folks from Bellevue. You have folks from DuPont or from Puyallup. Folks from Bremerton and Silverdale. So it's a diverse group, but it's been a great experience, and I'm gonna be able to continue to serve on all those boards, and continue to help ensure that our county is part of the region, because I think there is where we have great opportunities to bring aerospace jobs to our county, diversify our economy, and ensure that when it comes to transportation, we have support from the region for the critical needs of our community.
That's great. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll
Sure.
let you sign off.
Thank you for yours. I appreciate everybody tuning in to another edition of Commissioner's Corner. I look forward to catching up with you all soon. Thanks.